Chapter 11. AI Huey's Hypothesis. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene. Editor. Lise. Of course, AI Huey had no idea that a vengeful someone was looking all over for him. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Who had time for that? He didn't even feel like entertaining Lu Lan whenever he visited, and he was such a nice sand puppet. AI Huey was completely engrossed in his own learning and trainings. It was as if he had entered a vast new world full of rich colors. There were so many hidden places within the induction ground to train in that AI Huey discovered something new every day. He was lost in happiness and never tired of it. No place required more skills than the wilderness, where it was devoid of warmth, clear-cut and without any pretense. Within the wilderness, there were no suitable grounds for him to train. Places with a slightly more concentrated elemental energy was already occupied by either powerful, dire beasts or the barbarian tribes. And since he had to advance forward with the team, he had little time to train, especially with the tedious odd jobs to complete. He could never rest well either, as the elementalists never seemed to need it with their brisk work efficiency. No teacher would be able to explain this. The elementalists who were willing to teach him a skill or two were already considered very friendly and kind, whereas whenever he met the bad-tempered ones who happened to dislike him, inevitable suffering ensued. Compared to the wilderness, the induction ground was like heaven. AI Huey possessed unrivaled passion that had been accumulating and bubbling for 3 years. Once released, the intensity of its explosion exceeded that of a volcano eruption. AI Huey was as if possessed, immersed in his training. He knew he had a low aptitude and did not dare to set unreachable goals. He only hoped to become a registered elementalist. The problem was that even this goal required an extraordinary amount of effort in order to be realized. How could there be any time to waste? These 4 years was the only time for him to change his destiny. He knew a second chance would not come. Since the wilderness trained him to be adaptive, it did not take long for AI Huey to settle down comfortably into the city. His strategy for schooling also gradually changed. Initially he took every available class, but gradually he began to filter, learning how to pick and choose. It was important to always understand the circumstances as well as the most crucial problem at hand, as he had learned to do so in the wilderness that was so cold and full of death. Right now, the most pressing concern was activating his natal residence. If he didn't manage to accomplish this within a year, he would have to leave the school. The training ground he chose for himself was the suspending Golden Pagoda. Located about 150 miles outside the city, few students were willing to travel so far even by the 3 leaves bamboo cart just to train, leaving the pagoda mostly deserted. Needless to say, AI Huey refused to take the 3 leaves bamboo cart. The cost of the round trip exceeded 1,000 yuan, he'd feel the pain for days. To him, traveling the 150 miles was a warm-up exercise. In the wilderness, the pace of combat was shockingly fast. Although AI Huey was a laborer who didn't need to take part in the battles, he still had to keep up with the team while carrying all the supplies. The first thing laborers learned in the wilderness was to run, only then could they keep pace with the team. Nobody wanted a slow-moving laborer who was unable to follow. AI Huey's body was neither robust nor were his strides very big, but he was steady and the top half of his body was motionless, lacking any unnecessary movements. He traversed not the main roads but through the mountain forest like a nimble cheetah, effortlessly loping through in a straight line. It took him 20.6 minutes this time to rush down to the pagoda, 5 minutes faster than the previous attempt. AI Huey was satisfied as he was fond of progress. A dilapidated iron pagoda appeared before him with nobody else around. It had a total of 7 floors and many areas were in ruins. Its history could be traced all the way back to the cultivation era, back when it belonged to a great sect and was used to suppress others. After the spiritual force disintegrated, however, the sect collapsed, leaving the pagoda to fall into decline. What stood before him now was the preserved remains. It survived the ravages of time thanks to the metal wind cave beneath. The gales it received from the cave contained concentrated metal elemental energy that eventually transformed the once wooden pagoda into an iron one that remained today. Later, the induction ground remodeled it into a training ground, but since it was in a remote location with no discernible advantage over the many other training grounds within the city, very few visited. The suspending golden pagoda was actually not meant for beginners but rather for students who already activated their natal residence. Ai Hui had another plan. He approached the entrance and heard deep rumbling. Ai Hui finally understood why the place was so deserted. Just by listening to the sound of the wind, he knew that the metal wind inside was extremely strong. Almost none of the seniors who wrote the guidebooks recommended this place. According to them, the suspending golden pagoda was like an upside-down waterfall of overwhelming power. The metal wind currents contained dense elemental energy that was bone-scrapingly painful when blown against the body. Unfortunately, it was also extremely pervasive, able to enter the pores deep into the flesh, multiplying the suffering. In comparison, the whirlpool within the city's hot springs was gentler and much more comfortable. Obviously, no one would ask for trouble by coming here since both environments produced the same results. What spurred Ai Hui into visiting this place was a seemingly unremarkable sentence that he came across while reading a particular senior's guidebook. If your endurance is great, go straight to the suspending golden pagoda, the results are quite good. In terms of affinity, he had little confidence with his low aptitude that probably wouldn't fulfill the minimum requirement. But when it came to endurance, it was a different story. During his stay in the wilderness, he managed to form a tenuous strand of elemental energy after drinking a specially brewed elemental soup. In it were ingredients he had accumulated over time, including a piece of dire beast's meat given to him by an elementalist. The elemental energy formed by humans was close to that of a dire beast's meat and thus was easily absorbed. This was the underlying reason behind the high cost of dire beast's meat as well as why countless elementalists risked their lives hunting them deep in the wilderness. The extremely precious wisp of elemental energy often saved Ai Hui's life in times of great danger. An elementalist once bluntly informed him that he had a low aptitude and no affinity with elemental energy. And unfortunately, training with external items was something only the rich could afford to do. During his training later on, he realized that the master was indeed right. Even after 3 years, his elemental energy made little progress. Admittedly, there were many possible reasons such as insufficient training time, low concentration of elemental energy, lack of structured guidance and so on. But almost zero growth. Ai Hui saw for himself exactly how low his aptitude was. However, he had no plans to give up. In fact, since then, he'd been racking his mind for a solution. In the end, his only source of help came from those outdated and worthless sword manuals. The manuals from ancient times were practically synonymous with genius. No one but the gifted could think about touching them, and even more so in prestigious sections. But there were certain exceptional cases in which mediocre swordsmen made a name for themselves within the cultivation world, gaining skills that struck fear into the people's hearts. In the long past era of cultivators, tens of thousands of cultivation worlds had yet to merge. One of those fragments was a small sect known as the Void Sword Clan, where a disciple named Wei Xing lived. He was not gifted, yet he had great accomplishments, able to disdain other outstanding heroes. Ai Hui had glanced through enough swords manuals to know that Wei Xing was not the only such swordsman. Although Ai Hui had zero interest in swordsmanship, these swordsmen fought their way to the top in a society that nurtured only natural talents. Certain that they must have possessed some other qualities, Ai Hui hoped to find them out. These powerful fighters had similar characteristics like tenacity, diligence, and inhuman concentration. These were worth learning but clearly required great effort. After studying further, he realized they had another trait in common. Where there is bad, there is good. If someone was unable to perform in a certain aspect, it was not erroneous to shift focus. The seniors who had average aptitude managed to carve a path for themselves only because they found their own strengths. Ai Hui had felt that his interpretation was logical but not employable. That is, until now. After attending Teacher Dong's introductory course, his doubts were swept away. He now knew that the so-called bad aptitude meant a lower affinity between a practitioner and the elemental energy. Due to his lack of aptitude, the majority of the energy dissipated as soon as it entered his body, leaving only a little behind. This was why he had negligible progress. Everyone was born with different and unalterable aptitudes. This news was, to most people, no different from a death sentence. Yet instead of feeling dejected, Ai Hui started thinking of ways around it instead. Since his body had less affinity with elemental energy, what advantage did he have over others? He had to have an advantage. He had faith. Even if it wasn't obvious or very useful, it had to exist. The heavens would not be so unfair. Other than affinity, what else was involved in the training process? Upon reading the senior's words, his eyes brightened. Yes, other than affinity, there was endurance. Didn't his lack of affinity mean that his body was not sensitive enough towards the elemental energy? In that case, the metal wind currents people shied away from could actually be bearable. That was when Ai Hui understood. Was this endurance not the advantage he'd been searching for? Insensitivity towards elemental energy indeed slowed his training progress, but theoretically, shouldn't he be able to handle a higher concentration of elemental energy? He was not a helpless rookie any longer with his rich battle experience. Any slight advantage could be put into good use. There was another advantage, however, that Ai Hui discovered very quickly. Having a high endurance meant that he could undergo a more intensive training. And now here he stood to test his hypothesis. Chapter 12. The Gifted and the Garbage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene Editor. Li's teacher Dong was aware of Xuanhuan's arrogance and felt the beginnings of a headache. He was a talented young man, no doubt. Elegantly dressed with a solid build, and his handsome face carried a devilish charm, definitely the type that girls swooned over. Other than his haughty nature, this fellow had few shortcomings. But of course, he had every right to be proud. He was born into a prestigious sect that had a long-standing history within the Avalon of Five Elements. In fact, an ancestor of the Xuanmu clan contributed to the creation of the Avalon. Not only that, but Xuanhuan was outstandingly talented. Of all the students, he was among the top 5. Teacher Su felt his head throb. There was nothing wrong with being proud, it was normal for youths to be hot-headed. Plus, which youth was not? Perhaps he had been teaching in the induction ground, he had seen many talents, causing him to worry when he noticed Xuanhuan's hostility towards students of a lower realm. However, as an experienced educator, he kept a straight face and asked calmly, "How is it going? It's been a while since school started. Any impressions?" "It's okay." Xuanhuan responded with slight aloofness. "Just that the academic program is too simple." Teacher Su smiled. "That's because you were homeschooled and have talent. Of course you'll find it easy. This is also why I chose you as the class monitor, so I have high expectations for your excellent leadership skills. I hope you won't grow lax and continue to work hard." Upon hearing his teacher's confidence in him, he became excited. Compliments were irresistible to youths his age. Leader, what an admirable title, he thought. Just thinking about it moved him. He puffed his chest out and replied loftily, "Do not worry, Teacher Su, I won't let you down. You can do it." Teacher Su sounded exceptionally certain. "Then as a leader, how should you treat teammates who are not as strong as you? Of course you must help them. It is the responsibility of a leader after all. Let me assign you a mission. Ai Hui is slightly weaker, and I need you to assist him. How does that sound? Think you can do it?" Xuanhuan's jaw dropped. He was stunned. I knew from the start that you were born to be a leader. Teacher Su continued happily without waiting for a response. I will leave AI Hui in your hands. I don't expect the impossible. Hopefully, 1 year from now, he'll be able to activate 4 palaces. Xuanhuan was left speechless. Activating 4 palaces in 1 year. What a joke, this garbage had yet to open his natal residence. What is a talent? A talent is someone who can achieve the unachievable. With a stern expression, Teacher Su asked, Xuanhuan, are you doubting the talent in you? No, Xuanhuan blurted out. But immediately after, his face darkened as if he had just swallowed a fly. He felt terrible. Right from the start he disliked that trash AI Hui. Of the whole city, only 6 students were required to attend the introductory course, but one of them just had to be from his class. As the class monitor, he couldn't get himself to like this burdensome garbage. What right did this garbage have to be teammates with a gifted student like himself? And now the teacher actually expected him to be in charge of this fellow. This lightning bolt seemed to strike him out of the blue. He was going insane. Just looking at this guy made his blood boil. But now that he was supposed to help him, wouldn't he have to see this garbage every day? Xuanhuan was certain he'd go crazy by the end. No, maybe he already was. Going into Teacher Su's office had been a giant mistake. Something so ridiculous actually happened to him. Xuanhuan stumbled out of the office, still in shock. After a few steps, he suddenly understood what he just promised to do. He agreed to assist that garbage into activating 4 palaces. If being in charge of this garbage was like stepping into mud, activating 4 palaces in a year was like falling into a poisonous swamp. The elemental energy system had more or less reached maturation from thousands of years of development and improvement. Different family clans and schools had their own unique practices, but the core methodology did not stray from the system of the 5 residences and 8 palaces. The production of elemental energy first occurred in the 5 residences, or the natal residences. Each produced different elemental energies. Fire from the heart, wood from the liver, earth from the spleen, metal from the lungs, and water from the kidneys. The initial step to any training system was to activate the natal residence. Only then could the first door that separated the physical body from the external world be opened. The natal residence acted as a catalyst in the absorption of elemental energy which had a nature that differed greatly from spiritual force. While the energy was stored within the body, its flow did not follow the meridians. After much fumbling, humans managed to find 8 elemental energy storages and named them palaces. When all 8 were filled, an initial completion was accomplished. In the induction ground, filling 4 palaces was not a big deal. Not to mention the seniors, even he had 4 palaces filled. But AI Hui was a piece of garbage who had just completed his introductory course. Loading 4 palaces. What a joke. If not for Teacher Su's good reputation and public praise, Xuanhuan would have suspected him of pulling his leg. Only a genius could progress from nothing to 4 palaces within a year. Why then would such a genius require his help? His face was as black as the underside of a pan. He almost turned and charged into Teacher Su's office again. But once he recalled the teacher's words that a talent is one who can achieve the unachievable, he abruptly stopped in place. That's right, he was a gifted genius. Xuanhuan clenched his teeth. He roughly pulled apart his beautifully embroidered shirt collar. Defeat was not a word in his dictionary. A genius like him could never give up so easily. Poor garbage, you better thank heaven for blessing you with such an opportunity. Xuanhuan raised his chin and readjusted his collar, regaining his usual grace. He strolled down the corridor and thought hard on how he could reach the target Teacher Su had set for him, not caring about the adoring gazes from the girls lining the corridor. Thanks to the knowledge and experience he had from being homeschooled, he quickly came up with a few possible plans. His eyes lit up and his handsome face was full of concentration. Instead of his usual arrogance and viciousness, another kind of aura fell upon him. The smitten female students were so distracted by him that they lost their footing and fell hard on the floor. Xuanhuan snapped out of his thoughts and raised his head. As his enchanting eyes fell upon them, they momentarily forgot their pain, they were love-struck. Xuanhuan involuntarily laughed, his warm smile mesmerizing. Thud, thud, thud. A series of tumbling noises rang out in the hallway. 10 minutes later, Xuanhuan stood ashen-faced beside the hot springs whirlpool. He scanned his surroundings a few times, but saw no one at all. Despite searching the usual training grounds frequented by students, he could not find Ai Hui. He even asked a few classmates but no one had seen him. Damn it! Steam was coming out of his ears. Xuanhuan had never been so angry before. It was humiliating enough for him to teach this garbage, but d*mn, this piece of trash was lazy. Not only did he lack the skills but he also wasn't hard-working, unable to even attain the basic training routines. How was this useless lump of mud going to transform into a solid wall? Yet no matter how angry he was, he still could not locate Ai Hui's whereabouts. He specially made a trip to the dormitory to ask around, only to realize that Ai Hui did not stay there. No one knew where he lived. God*Mn. Chapter 13. Wind of the Suspending Golden Pagoda. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Cynthia. Editor. Pranav. The world inside the door was entirely different. After spitting out the blade of grass he had been chewing, Ai Hui had just stepped into the suspending golden pagoda before he was battered and overwhelmed by intense gales. All he could hear were the deafening roars of the wind, a fierce sound that he had never heard before. Beneath him were iron fences, and violent metal winds that spewed from the depths swirled into a turbulent vortex that stormed throughout the pagoda. Yet before he could gain his footing, Ai Hui was sent flying into the air by the wind. Like a lone leaf swaying in a storm, all he could sense was the world spinning around him. Bang! Ai Hui grimaced with severe pain as his back forcefully slammed into a wall. The metal wind was so severe that he could not even open his eyes. Even worse, it felt like innumerable small needles were pricking through his muscles and piercing deep into his bones. Ai Hui's face turned pale as the unspeakable pain instantly spread all over his body. He had underestimated the pagoda. However, thanks to Ai Hui's extensive experience in life-and-death situations, the second he realized his mistake, his body reacted instinctively. Under such a circumstance, which was completely out of his control, the first thing he had to do was protect himself. He huddled himself up with his arms on his head. Bang! 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 He was like a ball bouncing around the pagoda. The penetrative metal wind continued to submerge him in a flood of pricking pain. Ai Hui felt powerless, a familiar feeling that seemed to bring him back to his initial days in the wilderness. As the seconds passed, the pain became increasingly severe, to the point that it almost exceeded what he could bear. He felt as if his bones were being rasped by millions of files. When was the last time he was in such a fluster? He could not really remember. Even in the wilderness, he had never been in such a state for long. Although he was aware that the suspending golden pagoda was for those who had opened their natal residences, he assumed that he could persist because he was confident in his own endurance. The extremely concentrated metal energy in the wind permeated into his flesh and blood without showing any signs of diffusion, which indicated that this metal energy could not be absorbed by his muscles. Underestimating your rivals can put yourself in a terrible state, just like Ai Hui's situation at the moment. It could not be more disastrous. The first step for elemental energy cultivation was to absorb elemental energy into the muscles. One of the quickest methods was to consume elemental soup because a dire beast's meat was rich in elemental energy. This was best for beginners to absorb and was how Ai Hui had cultivated his own meager amount of elemental energy. This method was excellent but expensive. Evidently, a poor wretch like Ai Hui could hardly afford it. Another conventional cultivation method was to absorb elemental energy from outside and was referred to as elemental energy input. In this approach, the type of elemental energy could not be chosen casually, and most people would prefer a mild type for easier absorption. The needle dot-like elemental energy contained in the metal wind of the pagoda, however, was not moderate at all. The prickling pain indicated that it could not be easily absorbed and was hence hurting his muscles. Ai Hui tried to assimilate the energy into his own, but soon realized that he was being too naive. Although the metal elemental energy appeared to be as thin as a strand of hair, it was much more concentrated than his own. It was only at this moment that he finally realized why the suspending golden pagoda was only for those who had opened their natal residences. Bang! Striking into something violently, Ai Hui was suddenly jerked back into reality, but he soon felt as if all his bones were broken. Although that collision had been unpleasant, he could now discern that the prickling sensation in his back had weakened. Ai Hui suddenly realized something. Maybe. Bang! Although he had struck himself on the wall yet again, Ai Hui rejoiced excitedly. He could still clearly perceive the pain in his muscles, but the prickling sensation had been considerably reduced. Even though he was amidst such chaos and was unarmed, Ai Hui was calm enough to observe the slightest changes of his body. Whenever his body was knocked into something, the metal elemental energy scattered and was more easily absorbed than the energy in the wind, hence decreasing the pain. Nevertheless, Ai Hui's luck didn't last long before his expression abruptly changed. The scattered energy had not even been completely absorbed before additional elemental energy permeated into his body, intensifying the pain while causing him to feel as if he had a severe case of dropsy. Although in theory, those who had opened their natal residences could choose to train at the suspending golden pagoda, Ai Hui did not know that there were actually very few students who would decide to do so. This was because the metal wind was too wild and the elemental energy, despite being extremely concentrated, was incredibly difficult to absorb. Worse still, there were endless amounts of energy in the pagoda. The moment he thought of this, Ai Hui realized the danger of his situation. If he stayed for any longer, the growing pain will dull his mind and consciousness, finally resulting in the explosion of his body. He had to leave right now. Ai Hui stretched his body as he carefully guided his own little bit of elemental energy to his eyes. He could not possibly escape such a perilous environment with the strong wind preventing his eyes from opening. Under his meticulous control, the elemental energy inside his body was infused into his eyes for the first time. Perhaps because his body was experiencing an indescribable prickling pain, Ai Hui felt only a slight discomfort in his eyes before immediately overcoming it. As his vision returned, Ai Hui was able to view the interiors of the pagoda for the first time. Ai Hui swirled along with the wind like a dead leaf. Due to long periods of erosion and metallization by the metal wind, the surrounding cross-grained walls glimmered with a dark metallic luster. The inside of the pagoda was empty, everything, including the staircases, was long gone. To Ai Hui's surprise, as the metal wind spiraled higher, its strength did not weaken, but instead, grew stronger. Yet he had no time to look up. Time was very tight, and he had to escape before the energy surpassed his body's limit. Ai Hui was intensely focused as he prepared himself by carefully adjusting his position. With his entire body tingling with pain, it was exceedingly strenuous to maintain a state of concentration, but this was not a difficult problem to the experienced Ai Hui. Seeing the gate of the pagoda rapidly approaching, Ai Hui twisted his waist and stretched his body like a spring, as he slightly touched his toes to the ground. Pow! Forcefully pushing his toes, Ai Hui folded his body into a strange angle, as if his waist was broken, and placed his hands on the ground, resembling a large cat arching its back. Using both his hands and feet, he frantically scrambled out of the suspending golden pagoda. The instant he exited, all of his strength dissipated, making him feel pain so severe that he felt like he was dropped onto thousands of needles. Ah! The anguished cry frightened away a mass of birds from the nearby woods. Ai Hui screamed for 20 minutes before he recovered from the pain. It was really unbearable. Even with his face contorted in pain, tears in his eyes, and non-existent strength, Ai Hui struggled and eventually managed to get on his feet. There was a significant surplus of metal element in his body, even lying still could not stop the bone-stabbing pain. Long-lasting pain is no better than short-term pain. Remembering that the bumping had helped ease the pain, Ai Hui quickly made up his mind. He hastily rushed to the nearest tree. Pow! The tree snapped. Next, he crashed into a large stone in front of him. Bang! The stone shattered. Ai Hui anxiously searched around. What else can he crash against? Ah! The birds and beasts of the woods fled in panic. Behind them, a miserable cry lingered along with the sand and dust in the air, while countless trees fell down one after another as if there was a horrible, mad ancient beast running amok. Chapter 14. Harder than iron, stronger than steel. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene Editor. Pranav Lu Lan, who was sitting by the entrance of the Vanguard training hall, was bored to death. When he finally noticed the limping Ai Hui, who had a bloody nose and a swollen face, he crooked his head and curiously asked, Ai Hui, what happened? The moment Ai Hui identified Lu Lan, Ai Hui's dull eyes suddenly brightened. Without any hesitation, he grabbed onto Lu Lan and shoved the door open. Do me a favor. Lu Lan stood up immediately and replied somewhat happily, okay. Hurriedly pulling Lu Lan into the training hall, Ai Hui chose a spacious area before firmly standing still. With a serious expression, he sincerely requested, beat me up. Lu Lan opened his eyes wide as he gawked at Ai Hui. He thought he had heard wrong. Come on, hit me. As hard as you can. Ai Hui urged. He had been crashing and knocking into everything on his way back, but the amount of metal elemental energy that remained in his body was still aplenty. However, he had exhausted all his strength. Let alone knock into something, he was unable to lift even a single finger at this point. Plus, he did not dare to act recklessly in the city, he could not afford to pay for any damages. But when he saw Lu Lan, he had immediately thought of this fantastic idea. He could get the same results without even exerting any strength. Lu Lan tilted his head and looked at Ai Hui seriously, before concernedly asking, Ai Hui, have you gone crazy? I have not. This is all part of training. Ai Hui racked his brains and then briefly explained, I have created a secret training method. Oh. Lu Lan had apparently started to understand the situation. Come on, come on. Ai Hui vigorously encouraged him. Use more strength. The harder, the better. Do not worry about hurting me. I have a high endurance. But, I do not know how to fight, Lu Lan replied meekly. Ai Hui felt like he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. His eyes were opened wide, as he stammered in disbelief, do not know how to fight. Fight. Ai Hui was almost convinced that he had misheard. Indeed, the word fight had become unfamiliar to him. To a seasoned fighter who had undergone 3 years of hardship and severe training in the wilderness, fight was too trivial a term. He only registered the word after 2 seconds. Wait, did not know how to fight. A sand puppet that did not know how to fight. Ai Hui stared at Lu Lan expressionlessly. All the sand puppets that he had come across were skilled fighters. They were also heartless, sly, and good at disguising and setting traps. They strictly followed orders and had all kinds of deadly tricks up their sleeves that were impossible to defend against. Sand puppets were real killer machines, it could be said that they were born to battle. But this was the first time he had encountered a sand puppet that did not know how to fight. Ai Hui involuntarily blurted, then what do you know? Lu Lan counted on his fingers. I can wash, cook, buy groceries, clean the house and garden, make tea. AI Hui was utterly flabbergasted. He felt that his perception of the world had been hugely challenged. Was this still a sand puppet? When he finally regained his focus, AI Hui demonstrated his powerful adaptability. Having no other choice, he could only reassure Lu Lan. No problem, I will teach you. However, he did not sound confident. Lu Lan, on the other hand, was thrilled. I will work hard. Night soon arrived. The calabashes were lit as they released a brilliant white light, which enveloped the hall in a glow as bright as snow. Two entangled silhouettes could be seen. The way you just attacked isn't right. You're a sand puppet with no joints. You should not blindly imitate. Lu Lan, you're a sand puppet. You should be soft when you have to and hard when you have to. Elemental energy is the key. Use it to strengthen your attacks. Harder than iron. Stronger than steel. Pay attention to the angle. Yes, the angle of attack is very important. Do not hold back. Stop only when I ask you to. Yes, you are improving. Ooh, that is fierce. Use more strength. Ah. Time ticked by. Lu Lan was excited because he believed that he was progressing swiftly. He always felt happy whenever he was able to learn something new. Although he believed that AI Huey's obsession was slightly strange, he was still glad to be able to help. Keeping AI Huey's oft-repeated advice, do not hold back, in mind, he struck hard. Lu Lan beautifully launched 15 consecutive strikes as he compiled enough energy to release a final blow. A resounding boom was produced by a punch that surpassed all his previous hits. Like a human punching bag, Ai Hui formed a graceful arc as he flew more than 30 feet away. Superbly done. Lu Lan was extremely satisfied with his recent attack. He had executed it perfectly, without a single mistake. Ai Hui gasped for breath as he laid pitifully on the ground. His gaze was unfocused, and he looked lifeless. Lu Lan bent over, tilted his head and earnestly asked, Ai Hui, are we going to resume training? Ai Hui could no longer feel the sting because all of his muscles and flesh were aching. The remaining metal elemental energy should have dispersed. Let us end it here. However, Ai Hui immediately realized something horrifying. The muscles in his face had become numb from the previous explosive attack, and now, he could not even open his mouth. Not only that, his whole body was paralyzed. Did he just teach Lu Lan how to launch a paralyzing attack? Damn, why did he do that? Ai Hui. Lu Lan crooked his head. Are we going to continue? Enough. It was enough. More than enough. Ai Hui moaned inwardly. Lu Lan's face appeared to dawn with realization as he suddenly recalled something. I understand now. You mentioned earlier that I should only stop when you say so. I got it, let us resume. Lu Lan will continue to work hard. Lu Lan transformed one of his arms into a sand whip and launched an attack at Ai Hui while repeatedly muttering, harder than iron. Stronger than steel, no. Ai Hui's moan turned into horror. No, no, no. Hey, hey, hey. Enough. Stop training. Let us stop training. Bang, bang, bang. Amidst a barrage of violent, storm-like attacks, the helpless Ai Hui felt himself crumbling inside. Xuanhuan looked gloomy. All his close friends were intentionally avoiding him, as they knew that this fellow had better not be provoked when in a bad mood. However, now, he was not just in a bad mood, he was in an incredibly dreadful mood. They all knew that Xuanhuan was an exceedingly proud person, who had always exuded grace and elegance. When had they ever seen him with such a black face? Moreover, with his expression worsening each day, he now looked as if he was ready to kill. Anyone with well-working eyes would shun him as well. Xuanhuan was feeling extremely terrible. After scanning the school compound yet again, his face darkened. Damn it! That bastard! He clenched his fist so hard it became white. It had already been a few days. That damned garbage actually dared to skip so many classes. His pride was already hurt from the fact that he had to coach a rookie. He desperately tried to console himself. Look at the bigger picture. I will become a leader. I am a genius. Yet reality had actually dealt him such a brutal blow. He could do nothing about it except swallow his anger and humiliation. It was awful enough that he had failed to find AI Hui after making so many trips down to various training grounds. He had already accepted the fact that AI Hui was the lousiest student of the entire induction ground and had long since planned to drag him over and drill him, but this fellow did not even attend classes. At this point, all Xuanhuan wanted to do was curse. He had seen lazy people, but never any to this extent. If you don't even go to class, then why in the world did you join? It had not been easy for him to lower his pride and concede to his teacher's request. But what happened now? He could not even find that fellow. Xuanhuan was crying inside. Why are you toying with me? What wretched luck I have, for me to experience something this ridiculous. For me to meet such a ridiculous person. Just the thought of this garbage damaging his reputation of a great genius sent him into a blazing fury. Just you wait. Hate was swiftly growing in Xuanhuan's heart. Chapter 15. Replenishing Elemental Energy with Soup. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. YH Editor. Pranav AI Hui bewilderedly opened his eyes, while his aching body allowed him to take just one breath of the chilly air. You're awake. Lu Lan pushed the door open and entered the room with a steaming bowl of soup in his hands. Despite being quite a distance away, AI Hui could smell the alluring scent that wafted towards him, unintentionally causing his stomach to let out an embarrassing, loud growl. Making a conscious effort to swallow his saliva, he weakly asked, "What time is it?" "It's 8 in the morning," Lu Lan replied, as he carefully handed the soup over to AI Hui. The moment he laid his eager hands on the bowl, AI Hui momentarily forgot about his aches and immediately wolfed down the heavenly, delicious soup. "What time did last night's practice end?" he asked indistinctly. Not long into last night's session, his consciousness had started to fade, which rendered him unable to recollect anything about what had subsequently happened. 5 in the morning, stated Lu Lan. 5. AI Hui's reaction was a bit sluggish, but then his expression suddenly stiffened. He finally realized the reason why his entire body was throbbing with aches and why even moving a single finger had become a painful ordeal. His cheeks twitched in disbelief, as he asked, "You were beating me up the whole time till 5 in the morning?" AI Hui immediately felt uneasy when he thought of his unconscious self being violently beaten up like a punching bag. "I'm very sorry," Lu Lan sincerely apologized. "Although you didn't ask me to stop, I had to end the practice at 5 to prepare breakfast for Master Xiao. But now I have already completed this morning's tasks and can continue practicing with you. Shall we begin?" Feeling sorry for thrashing him only until 5 in the morning, though. AI Hui shook his head firmly and hurriedly cried out, "No thanks." With last night's tragic experience still vivid in his mind, AI Hui could not muster up the courage. When AI Hui noticed that Lu Lan seemed to be a bit down, he coughed, and remarked, "This soup tastes pretty good." AI Hui had no idea what soup it was, he was only cognizant of the fact that the soup was incredibly delicious and that it was undoubtedly the best that he had ever consumed. Furthermore, after drinking the soup, a pleasant feeling of heat had gently washed over his body, flowing through every nook and cranny of his being and leaving him feeling comfortably warm. Lu Lan, having just been praised, perked up quite a bit. AI Hui, your training places great strain on the body. To prevent deficiencies that could further develop into internal injuries, you must timely replenish and nourish your body, he quipped. you are really amazing. AI Hui could not help but exclaim. No wonder I feel my body heating up, it's just like when I had previously tried some elemental soup. Now, that was a perfect dish, one that even had elemental energy. Lu Lan's tone rose slightly. This soup also replenishes elemental energy. This soup. Elemental food. AI Hui was momentarily stunned. Elemental food was incomparably more expensive than average meals. The school provided such food as well, but even though it could be considered cheaper than what was available outside, it still carried a hefty price tag. An ominous premonition rose up in AI Hui's chest. He slowly began, the ingredients for this soup. They were found in your bag, AI Hui, Lu Lan replied matter-of-factly. Although they were just scraps, the ingredients were of decent quality and were suitable for brewing soup. While a standard recipe wasn't followed, please rest assured that at least 70% of the elemental energy was utilized. AI Hui felt as though he was forcefully hit by an iron rod. Just how much did you use? He asked, stupefied. Don't worry, I have used up everything. I can guarantee that there was absolutely no wastage, Lu Lan wholeheartedly pledged. This was totally not the kind of guarantee he was looking for. Thump. With his heart filled with despair, AI Hui stiffly collapsed back onto the bed with a forlorn thud. The ingredients that he had painfully accrued for over 3 whole years had disappeared just like that. After 3 years of scrimping and saving he had finally accumulated a few valuables. The mere thought of his precious ingredients being used up after just a night's rest left him trembling with unbearable heartache. If AI Hui understood what utilizing 70% of the elemental energy meant, then AI Hui, you should start cultivating now to properly absorb the elemental energy, Lu Lan reminded. AI Hui quivered in realization. His ingredients had already been spent, so there was no point in feeling resentful anymore. He gritted his teeth and crawled out of bed. No amount of sweat or blood could deter him from making full use of this elemental energy. AI Hui sat crossed-legged, and according to Teacher Dong's method, he focused entirely on guiding the silver of elemental energy along the path of the 5 residences and 8 palaces. Of the 8 palaces, the 4 that were the easiest to open were those present in the 4 limbs, the left-hand palace, the right-hand palace, the left leg palace and the right leg palace. The other 4 palaces, the sky, gate, sea and earth palaces, were located from the space between the eyebrows down to the tailbone, and were significantly harder to open. However, regardless of whether the natal residences were opened or whether the 8 palaces were accessed, the flow of elemental power always revolved around the 5 residences and 8 palaces. The only difference between the various schools laid in the sequence of routes that the energy could take in the body. Different paths would result in entirely distinct results, giving rise to the myriad of available cultivation methods. Additionally, the marvels and profound mysteries of each of the 8 gates presented many opportunities for deeper research and exploration. Each school would pick out an area for further study, and over time, the knowledge gained from the extended periods of research would gradually accumulate and consolidate into their esoteric, unshared secrets. AI Hui had chosen the safest and simplest route. It started from the 4 palaces in his limbs and was followed by the space between the brows. From there, he continued downwards, using the elemental energy to thread between the sky and earth palaces. Once he started to guide the elemental energy, however, AI Hui felt different than usual. AI Hui had never perceived anything like it. His elemental energy had been significantly strengthened after flowing through only the left-hand palace. Gentle yet lively, the elemental energy lightly coursed through his body, causing him to feel lithe, alive and full of vigor. The movement of elemental energy was practically effortless, a far cry from the heavy sluggishness that he usually experienced. It was not long, however, before AI Hui became agitated, as he discovered that the elemental energy within his body was gradually dissipating outward. His body's affinity for elemental energy was still too low. Preventing himself from becoming distracted again, AI Hui concentrated on the flow of elemental energy, and pressed on, making use of every precious second. Do not waste it. Just thinking about how this elemental energy had stemmed from his 3 years of cumulative efforts provided AI Hui with a burst of adrenaline. His entire attention was centered on the elemental energy within his body, which was now surging with speed akin to that of a crazy, sprinting wild horse. On recognizing that AI Hui was fully engrossed in his cultivation, Lu Lan silently stepped out of the room. As time crept by, AI Hui, who had continued to meditate cross-legged, started to emanate a slight, silvery glow. If one moved closer, they would be able to see that this thin layer of light consisted of numerous needles of converging light rays, which were, in actuality, the manifestations of the dispersing elemental energy. However, despite AI Hui's strenuous efforts, a large amount of elemental energy had still dispersed into the surrounding atmosphere. As he cultivated, AI Hui gradually began to comprehend some insights. He soon realized that the silver elemental energy was the type of energy that was most abundant in his body. This silver elemental energy was, in fact, a form of the scattered metal elemental energy. However, being finer and with a milder attribute, it appeared to be somewhat like fireflies gently floating within his body. It existed in a free floating state and was also the fastest dispersing type of elemental energy. The other type of elemental energy present was much more stable and had a high affinity with his physical body, and every time AI Hui circulated his elemental energy, he would absorb large amounts of it. More importantly, it could also bind and incorporate large quantities of the free floating metal elemental energy into AI Hui's original pool of elemental energy. This kind of elemental energy probably existed uniquely in the elemental energy replenishing soup. AI Hui had finally understood why so many people risked their lives and delved into the wilderness to hunt for dire beasts. Even though the metal elemental energy had dispersed until there was practically nothing left, AI Hui did not cease his practice, and he persistently channeled his elemental energy. His body, as well, was unceasingly emitting a faint aura. Chapter 16. Meeting of Rivals. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. YH Editor. Pranav. The faint silver glow gently lingered around AI Hui as smoke-like spirals, gradually transforming into hazy, sword-shaped forms that flitted about. Suddenly, everything vanished with a flash. AI Hui was entirely immersed in his cultivation, completely unaware of what had just occurred. An hour later, he finally opened his eyes, which were filled with an incomparable joy. He had never experienced such a marked improvement in his past 3 years of arduous practice. AI Hui could barely contain his excitement. After all, he had persevered for 3 years before now finally glimpsing the light. What else could make one happier? Although he ultimately absorbed only 5% of the metal elemental energy, the total elemental energy within his body had been tripled, an unimaginable improvement for him. Even though AI Hui had a low absorption efficiency, it did not particularly concern him, as this shortcoming could be overcome with persistent practice and perseverance. To him, any visible improvement, no matter how little, was an achievement. He was most afraid of staying utterly stagnant despite practicing for many years. AI Hui carefully reflected on his training. Lu Lan's soup had fulfilled a crucial function. Without it, AI Hui would not have been able to absorb such a relatively large amount of metal elemental energy. Without its aid, however, AI Hui did not know how much energy he could have absorbed, but he sensed that the result would have been drastically different. AI Hui shook his head and banished these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. The wealthy had their own practice methods, but the less affluent had theirs too. While the metal elemental energy that was infused into his body was exceedingly harsh, it was, at the same time, much more condensed and pure. Although AI Hui could only absorb a tiny fragment of the energy, it was countless of times purer than what the average novice could achieve. Because he was aware of this, AI Hui did not stop cultivating the elemental energy, even when most of it had already dispersed. Most students pursued a higher cultivation level and hence vigorously strived to strengthen their elemental energy. AI Hui, who had an abundance of combat experience, had encountered all types of powerful individuals. He had come across many elementalists who had similar cultivation levels but vastly different fighting strengths. AI Hui had long since comprehended that the purer the elemental energy, the easier it was to manipulate, thus allowing one to have greater efficacy in their attacks. AI Hui had also understood that although the silver of elemental energy in his body was weak, it was extremely pure, and because it was also highly versatile in his hands, this elemental energy had repeatedly saved his life. Several of his tricks had even been praised by elder elementalists. Powerful weapons are no match for those readily on hand. When AI Hui stepped out of the room and saw a pristine, completely clean training hall, he was shocked. Noticing AI Hui's expression, Lu Lan explained, "I had some spare time on my hands and so conveniently cleaned up the place. If you aren't happy, though, I will not do it again." "You did a way better job than me," AI Hui stammered with embarrassment. The hall looked as if it was thoroughly washed clean, and even the remote corners were totally free of dust. AI Hui had always claimed that he was a hall cleaning specialist, never did he imagine that there would be someone who was several times better. When he received the praise, Lu Lan was obviously elated, and he cheerfully remarked, "I am a sand puppet, and we are better at such things." Who would remember a sand puppet? AI Hui wondered why this phrase had suddenly popped into his mind. He glanced at Lu Lan, and then said out of the blue, "Thank you for the elemental energy replenishing soup. It was very useful." AI Hui rarely praised people in the same way, in fact, towards others, he was usually much more guarded and distant. In front of Lu Lan, however, he was evidently much more relaxed. Was it perhaps because Lu Lan was a sand puppet? It certainly seemed to be the case. When he heard that his soup was effective, Lu Lan felt even more pleased. Suddenly, his eyes started to glow with a rather demonic yellow light as he earnestly began to scrutinize AI Hui. AI Hui felt his hair stand on end. The bruises and swelling require some time to recover, but the muscle damage has largely healed, Lu Lan unexpectedly reported, as the glow in his eyes disappeared. After listening to Lu Lan's report, the uneasiness that AI Hui was feeling had completely vanished. He also started to feel that Lu Lan, with his unusual set of abilities, was becoming stranger by the day. Lu Lan was proficient in preparing meals, brewing soup, cleaning and even appeared to be well versed in medical treatment. Just what kind of combination was this? "I am going off to practice," said AI Hui, as he prepared to leave. He planned to make necessary preparations and purchase a few things before heading back to the suspending golden pagoda. "I should head back to work too, then." "Goodbye, AI Hui," Lu Lan replied as he waved farewell. Immediately after, his body transformed into a pile of sand, before seeping into the ground and completely disappearing from the training hall. Xuanhuan occasionally scanned the crowd as he marched alone on the streets. AI Hui had not attended class for the past several days, leaving Xuanhuan with no choice but to bring himself outside and try his luck in finding him. He knew that trying to find someone like that was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. However, if he was to tell Teacher Su that he wanted to give up, that would be very embarrassing for him. Just thinking about that scoundrel, AI Hui, made him tremble with anger. His devilishly charming yet refined, good looks attracted the attention of many who passed by. However, a good number of beautiful women had tried to approach him, only to be scared off by a furious, ice-cold gaze. After finding a camphor tree by the road, he leaned his slender body against it and started to leisurely eat a skewer of candied fruits. The bright crimson of the candied fruits contrasted sharply with his pale face, painting a dazzling, striking image. The young ladies were afraid to approach Xuanhuan, so they flocked together nearby to gaze at him. Oh, how they longed to be that skewer of candied fruits that he held in his hands. Xuanhuan, however, continued to stand with an elegant air of nonchalance. He had long been accustomed to being stared at and could care less about others were watching him. Xuanhuan. Let's see how you're going to escape now. A yell suddenly rang out from the opposite side of the street. After a quick glance, Xuanhuan promptly chose to ignore the situation and continued to leisurely eat his candied fruits. A well-built, young man appeared not too far away from Xuanhuan. With gleaming eyes and a mocking glare, he taunted, "Did you go into hiding after finding out that I, Zhao Zhibao, want to challenge you? Are you terrified? You disappoint me. I was under the impression that Xuanhuan was some type of genius, but it seems like he's just a coward." Xuanhuan did not even bat an eyelid. The enchanting sight of his long eyelashes, which gracefully stood against the glowing backdrop of his pale complexion, was enough to invoke jealousy from all the young women present. The onlooking group of young ladies started to go wild with excitement. "Zhao Zhibao! How can you simply shoot your mouth off like that? You're not even qualified enough to challenge our Huanghun." "Exactly. Do you think that any random Tom, Dick or Harry can challenge our Huanghun? Take a good look at yourself, with your long hair, boxy torso, and equally boxy legs. Hee hee. Are you trying to act like a wooden trunk with a mop stuck on top?" Hearing the taunts and jeers of the young women, Zhao Zibao's face flushed crimson as he flew into a rage. He had always considered himself to be a cut above the rest, and hearing of Xuanhuan's talent did not instill even the slightest amount of fear in him. Since he was a student that ranked in the top 5 of his class, Zhao Zhibao was particularly confident in his own extraordinary strength and had hence openly issued a challenge to Xuanhuan. "So this is our talented Xuanhuan, but his talent is in hiding behind a bunch of girls. Ha!" Xuanhuan, however, still did not lift a single eyelid. He then spat out the rosehip seeds that he was chewing, and said flatly, "I'm not in a good mood today, so you'd better scram." "Not in a good mood? Ha! Come on, beat me up," Zhao Zhibao teased. 5 minutes later. Without even a minute ripple in his expression, Xuanhuan elegantly withdrew his leg. Zhao Zibao's beaten body could be seen lying pitifully on the ground, not even his face was left untouched. Finishing his last rosehip seed, Xuanhuan tossed his bamboo stick aside before finally walking away indifferently. Pop! Zhao Zibho's gaze froze, he was too scared to move. The bamboo pick had forcefully dug into the earth barely 2 centimeters away from his nose. The girls who were watching cheered and screamed while they trailed behind Xuanhuan like a swarm of bees. A lady inconspicuously stood at a nearby street corner, wearing a light veil over her face. If one could look closely, however, they would see a glint in her eyes. Xuanhuan had unobtrusively come to Central Pine City to explicitly visit her clan's training hall, but little did she expect to witness such a scene. She had long heard of Xuanhuan's renowned name, but she had not anticipated that he would be here in Central Pine City as well. Furthermore, he had displayed his exceptional prowess. Could it have been him? Xuanhuan quickly shook her head. Even though it was a blind battle, that scoundrel's fighting style was completely different from Xuanhuan's. It was more violent and ferocious, much like that of a wild beast. She shortly turned around and left in the direction of her clan's training hall. After 20 whole minutes, Zhao Zhibao finally recovered some of his energy and started to effortfully struggle to get himself off the ground. However, when he lifted his head, he saw something that stunned him. Someone with a similarly battered face was walking towards him. When Ai Hui, who had just finished buying his things, saw Zhao Zhibao in the middle of the street, he too was completely taken aback. The two of them looked far too alike. They both had bloody noses, swollen faces, and bruises covering every inch of their bodies. Even their facial features were similarly disfigured, and both of their clothes were tattered as well. When Zhao Zhibao, who had just been beaten to a pulp, saw Ai Hui as a reflection of his miserable state, he believed that the situation itself had appeared to ridicule and humiliate him. He felt a sudden rush of inexplicable anger, which propelled him off the ground, and he viciously barked, "I am not in a good mood today, you'd better scram." Ai Hui narrowed his bruised, swollen eyes. Chapter 17. Conveniently you are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. YH Editor. Xai Hui felt that he did not have a good disposition, and in the wilderness, it was unnecessary. Instead, traits like strength, aggression, and perseverance were required. Even in the most desperate of times, one must be able to put everything on the line in exchange for a chance to survive. Those with a delicate disposition were the first to be eliminated. Besides, who wouldn't get riled up after being beaten up all the way till 5 in the morning? Ai Hui was like a volcano that was ready to explode, but he could not find an outlet. Lu Lan wore his naivety like armor, so his sincerity exposed no openings. Fatty was still the best since Ai Hui could beat him up whenever he felt like it. Here, someone had served up a sandbag just when Ai Hui felt like beating someone up. Squinting his swollen eyes, a cold murderous intent surged through Ai Hui's heavily bruised body. He promptly threw the stuff that he had bought on the floor, clearly not caring if they shattered. Zhao Zhibao saw the other person walk towards him, and the anger he felt rose to another level. He had no choice except to endure his loss to Xuanhuan, but he simply could not accept having some random person from the streets challenging him. How could he not be angry? With an evil grin on his face, Zhao Zhibao lunged at Ai Hui with his hands extended. His palms gave off dense, red flames. The red-hot tongues of flame lashed out as the hollow of his right palm flashed radiantly, raising the surrounding temperature. Zhao Zhibao was extremely satisfied. Xuanhuan had knocked him down before he could even utilize his elemental energy, then humiliated him by trampling him for 5 whole minutes. Now, his thoroughly damaged self-confidence soared with his flames, making Zhao Zhibao feel mighty again. His carelessness had led to his defeat at Xuanhuan's hands. Yes, it must have been so. If he had circulated his elemental energy earlier, the outcome of the battle might have been different. His opponent's silhouette was distorted by the flames. It had become tiny and insignificant, just like the countless other opponents he had defeated in the past. Blame it on your bad luck. Zhao Zhibao let loose an explosive cry. With an expert step forward, the streams of fire emanating from his right hand appeared to be molded by an invisible force, with 2 flame pillars spreading out like wings. The sharp overbearing cry of a crow rang out from amid the flames, creating the awe-inspiring image of a flaming crow spreading its wings. Zhao Zhibao's heart filled with ecstasy. Crow's wings of ice and fire was a move employed by both fire and water elementalists. Being a fire elementalist, Zhao Zhibao naturally practiced the fire crow. The first skill he learned upon opening his right-hand palace was the fire crow. The form manipulation involved was not difficult for him, but manipulating its form was only the first stage of the skill. The crow's cry was the next level, and the elemental energy's resonance with the skill signaled a sharp increase in its power. Zhao Zhibao did not expect himself to make a breakthrough at this moment. He felt it was a pity that such a magnificent skill was wasted on such an unworthy opponent. Not using this skill in the fight against Xuanhuan left him filled with regret. Ai Hui was unconcerned. Crow's wings of ice and fire was a commonly seen move and was nothing to make a fuss about. It was certainly not easy for him to achieve the crow's cry at his age, but that was about it. In the moment that Zhao Zhibao lunged forward, a glimmer of light flickered in Ai Hui's pupil. Almost simultaneously, he brazenly dashed toward his opponent. Ai Hui's actions gave Zhao Zhibao a slight shock. Rather than hide, Ai Hui had unexpectedly rushed toward him. Was his brain not functioning normally? Since his opponent had a death wish, Zhao Zhibao was most certainly not going to go easy on him. As the distance between the two rapidly grew closer, Zhao Zhibao became more and more excited. His eyes grew wide with excitement as an evil grin emerged upon his face. Ready to knock his opponent down with one blow, he prepared to raise his right palm. Just as his opponent was about to collide into Zhao Zhibao's palm technique, Ai Hui swerved his body, disrupting Zhao Zhibao's rhythm. His opponent's maneuver left Zhao Zhibao feeling unspeakably annoyed. Any moment later, Zhao Zhibao could have blindly accelerated his palm at his opponent. Any moment earlier, he would have time to make the necessary adjustments. This maneuver, however, was perfectly timed and completely stopped him in his tracks. The resulting discomfort left him reeling. Both parties were extremely close, so Zhao Zhibao had no time to alter his move. All he could do was twist his palm toward its side, sweeping at Ai Hui in a chopping motion. Wait a minute, where did he go? Zhao Zhibao's eyes suddenly grew wide, as if he had seen a ghost. His opponent had completely disappeared right in front of him. Just what was happening? Bang! Zhao Zhibao felt an intense pain in his right ribs, which slowly spread to the rest of his body in a flash. His body began to stiffen. How was this possible? His mind was a blank, unsure if the intense pain or the sudden shock had rendered him incapable of thought. After swaying aside, Ai Hui had bent over like a limber cat toward Zhao Zhibao's right ribs. He did not even use elemental energy for this blow. The nerves in this area were bundled densely such that any strong strike was enough to momentarily stun someone. After having gotten the upper hand with just one move, Ai Hui seized the opportunity, turned to his side, and infused elemental energy into the soles of his feet. A silver light flashed as Ai Hui quietly pressed his back onto Zhao Zhibao's chest. Ai Hui's arched back was like a compressed spring. Upon release, a powerful force exploded from his back, hitting Zhao Zhibao's chest like a wild rhinoceros. With a loud thud, Zhao Zhibao was sent flying backward in an arc. Bang! Zhao Zhibao landed heavily on the ground. Instantly, Ai Hui appeared beside Zhao Zhibao, relentlessly pursuing him in a demonic manner. Without any hesitation, Ai Hui pressed his right knee into Zhao Zhibao's back while his left hand gripped onto his opponent's head. His right hand conveniently grabbed the bamboo skewer stuck in the ground, then viciously stabbed Zhao Zhibao in the back of his neck. Ai Hui could easily stab a wild beast in the throat with a blunt chopstick, let alone with a bamboo skewer that had such a sharp edge. The whole process happened smoothly, as fast as lightning. At the instant that the bamboo skewer was just about to pierce through Zhao Zhibao's skin, Ai Hui had a sudden realization: this was not the wilderness. He forcefully stopped the bamboo skewer. On Zhao Zhibao's neck, a fresh red dot the size of a needle prick emerged and a drop of crimson blood seeped out of the wound. Zhao Zhibao, who had been knocked silly, had no idea that he had just narrowly missed death. This was not the wilderness. Ai Hui reminded himself once more, as his gaze became solemn and withdrawn. Ai Hui then conveniently threw the bamboo skewer back to the ground. Ah! Zhao Zhibao let out a mournful cry that abruptly stopped. Ai Hui withdrew his hand from Zhao Zhibao's nape without taking so much as a glance at the now unconscious Zhao Zhibao. Winning against such an opponent did not give him any thrill or excitement. Without any concept of timing, Zhao Zhibao's attacks were utterly superficial. Moreover, this opponent became distracted in the middle of the fight. Such a lackluster performance left Ai Hui feeling unsatisfied. As a result of his strong occupational habits, Ai Hui certainly did not forget to rake in his rewards. Zhao Zhibao was stripped bare of his possessions and even his armor was not spared. Such thoroughness had long been ingrained into Ai Hui's basic instincts. Earning 20,000 yuan put Ai Hui in a good mood. His opponent's clothes and materials were of good quality, so Ai Hui put them on without any hesitation. Picking up his belongings, Ai Hui continued toward the city gate. Xuanhuan had yet to give up. He picked out a high ground near the city gate, waiting idly for his target to show up. He plucked another skewer of candied fruits seemingly out of nowhere and began leisurely eating it. Since he's not in the city, could he be outside? After giving Zhao Zhibao a good beating, Xuanhuan felt himself becoming more placid. This was the only way into or out of the city. A group of young ladies hovered nearby, their eyes gazed upon Xuanhuan passionately. They suddenly became agitated. Look! Zhao Zhibao. He looks so pitiful. His face and body are all out of shape. He deserves it. How dare he challenge our Xuanhuan, this is already letting him off easily. Xuanhuan, who was standing on high ground, shot a quick glance at Zhao Zhibao before looking away. He had no interest in those he defeated. Xuanhuan had not looked Zhao Zhibao in the eye even once during the entire encounter. He did not care what Zhao Zhibao looked like before and cared even less now that the man was all battered. Ai Hui spotted Xuanhuan before quickly retracting his gaze. Eating candied fruits instead of attending lessons or practicing, the whims of a spoiled brat were indeed strange. He too heard the chatter coming from the group of ladies, but he had no inkling of who Zhao Zhibao was. Noting that it had nothing to do with him, Ai Hui disregarded the commotion and walked toward the suspending golden pagoda. Chapter 18. Fumbling. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. YH Editor. Defeating an amateur did not stir up Ai Hui's emotions, but the short battle did give him the opportunity to witness his own improvement. The increased elemental energy had a direct effect on his strength. The metal elemental energy absorbed from the suspending golden pagoda was much purer than that of common sources. The elemental energy within his body was still considerably weak, but a threefold increase in elemental energy implied much greater room for development. Ai Hui walked toward the suspending golden pagoda, stopping outside its front gate. With the previous experience still fresh in his mind, he did not hastily enter the grounds this time. The howling gales within the pagoda were still as intimidating as ever. Ai Hui took out the rope he just bought, tying one end to a rock the size of a wicker basket. He tied the other end to his waist, lifted the rock, and threw it into the pagoda. The rope suddenly stretched taut and a powerful pulling force quickly followed. Ai Hui was well prepared, but still he stumbled. The terrible metal winds within the pagoda violently tossed the rock in every direction. The force that pulled on the rope was beyond Ai Hui's expectations. He struggled to keep his body steady, but was still dragged toward the pagoda's entrance. Since was truly lucky to have made it out of the pagoda previously, Ai Hui felt a lingering fear. The rope suddenly relaxed, as the force pulling him forward disappeared. Ai Hui was still exerting his power backward and was unprepared for the sudden change. He reacted quickly, gently tapping the floor with his palm as he fell before he soared back up and landed squarely on his feet. The rope had snapped. Ai Hui pulled the broken end over to investigate and found that the rope had a large number of tiny pinhole-like punctures through it. Discovering that a rope made of grass was not good enough, Ai Hui shook his head. The numerous tiny holes were caused by fine silver strands of metal elemental energy piercing the rope. The rock would probably not last much longer either. Within moments, the slamming sounds coming from within the pagoda came to a halt, and a crashing noise followed. The rock must have been shattered into a pile of small stones. The metal winds were truly ferocious. No wonder this training ground was only recommended to those who had opened their natal palaces. Luckily, Ai Hui had a backup plan as he pulled out an iron chain that was as thick as his wrist. Dragging this iron chain all the way to the suspending golden pagoda had worn him out. He flung one end of the iron chain into the pagoda, waited a while, then pulled it back out. The chains remained undamaged. The metal fences in the pagoda that Ai Hui saw during last visit gave him the idea that an iron chain might be able to withstand the metal wind. Ai Hui expended a large amount of effort and spent an entire hour pushing a rock larger than himself to the pagoda. There was no other choice since he had smashed up all the surrounding rocks on his last visit. He wrapped one end of the iron chain around the rock before attaching the other to his waist. After ensuring that the ends were firmly secured, Ai Hui took a deep breath and jumped into the suspending golden pagoda. Once inside, Ai Hui was immediately swept up by the violent metal winds, spinning around like a top. A powerful force unexpectedly pulled at his waist, nearly snapping him into two. The iron chain wrapped around his waist was stretched so taut that it was perfectly straight. Seeing that his method worked, Ai Hui heaved a sigh of relief. He barely had time to rejoice before his back slammed into the wall. He promptly covered his head with his hands, curled into a ball, and allowed himself to bounce around like a rubber ball. This time around, Ai Hui stayed inside for a shorter duration. Rather than wait until he had almost hit his limit, Ai Hui used the iron chain to pull himself out once he started to feel bloated. Having dragged himself out of the pagoda, Ai Hui heaved a sigh of relief. The world inside the pagoda was completely different from the world outside of it. Ai Hui had managed his training well, his mind was clear and he still had some energy left. He started to hit his own body. After his previous training session, Ai Hui had pondered over how he could absorb metal elemental energy. Ai Hui's pursuit of power was unquestionable, but he had no desire to be beaten up every day from dusk to dawn. That was an experience he had no wish to repeat. He thus devised the method currently being employed. In order to absorb metal elemental energy, the first step he had to take was to scatter the fine silver threads of energy that had been taken into his body. If a smaller amount of it was taken in, then perhaps he could handle this step himself. Hitting himself and getting hit by others were essentially the same. The experience, however, was wholly different. Ai Hui hit himself with maximum effort while simultaneously observing any changes within his body. He closely monitored his strength and technique, fumbling around to get a feel for the most effective combination. He had a poor aptitude and was poor financially as well. All he could do was put in more effort. He gradually uncovered some tricks to this training, but soon encountered another problem. He was unable to reach the metal elemental energy within the muscles of his back. He deeply contemplated his options before resting his gaze on the suspending golden pagoda. This pagoda that had been exposed to the metal winds for so many years should be quite sturdy. As such, the walls of the suspending golden pagoda certainly seemed like a highly suitable piece of equipment for Ai Hui to ram his back into. Ai Hui quickly realized that he was thinking too much. The walls of the pagoda were as hard as metal, so dashing into them just 2 or 3 times would probably shatter his bones. A substantial portion of the metal elemental energy in his back was not yet scattered. Ai Hui suddenly thought of his recent fight with the amateur Xuanhuan guy where he had executed the arching fish back move. This skill, arching fish back, reminded him most of the blind battle. When he had locked his opponent down, the move she attempted to use to counter him was the arching fish back. Ai Hui, who constantly performed work that required copious amounts of strength, had the utmost confidence in his brute power. His opponent had shocked him by wielding a surprising amount of force and, almost breaking free of his grappling technique. He could sense that his opponent's elemental energy wasn't particularly strong and that her physical strength wasn't great either. The fact that her arching fish back was so powerful made it clear that she had profound martial attainments. Ai Hui had developed a strong interest in this move and copied it. In the 3 years he had spent in the wilderness, Ai Hui learned many skills that were unorthodox and fragmented, but were highly practical, just like the arching fish back. However, he rarely had an opportunity to use this move. Getting locked down by an opponent at his current level would spell certain doom. He would not even have the chance to execute the move. A flash of inspiration gave him the idea to use the arching fish back to send amateur Xuanhuan guy flying earlier that day. This experience helped him to find other uses for the technique. He began to repeatedly use the arching fish back against the walls of the pagoda. Not long after, he made another discovery. When he was curled up training in the pagoda, the part of his body that took in the most metal elemental energy was his back. Besides having an astonishing amount of explosive power, the arching fish back had a jolting effect as well. No wonder his arms had gone numb during the blind battle. The effectiveness of his idea boosted his morale significantly. Ai Hui became even more meticulous at his task. Once all the metal elemental energy had been scattered, Ai Hui sat in a lotus pose. He began to enter a meditative state, absorbing the dispersed metal elemental energy. An hour later, Ai Hui opened his eyes. He could feel an increase in his elemental energy. Although his improvement this time was much less than that of last night, that was to be expected. The thought of that bowl of elemental energy replenishing soup still made his heart ache. Last night's progress might have been remarkable, but the cost had been huge. This method of training might be long and arduous, but it didn't matter to Ai Hui as long as he saw possible improvement. For him who had struggled through dark and difficult times, but refused to pass into oblivion, hardship was not an issue. Chapter 19. Possessing the arching fish back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. YH Editor. X. Looking at the profusely sweating Xuanhuan, the middle-aged man was filled with regret. In hindsight, organizing the blind battle was truly a bad idea. He had brought this upon Miss Xuanhuan. Among the descendants from the current generation of the Shi family, Miss Xuanhuan was the most passionate. Despite her seemingly cold exterior, she was actually a warm person and was cherished by everyone. His eagerness in obtaining merit had resulted in Miss Xuanhuan's tireless training, for which he blamed himself greatly and felt terribly guilty. He had tried to persuade her a couple of times, but to no avail. Once Miss Xuanhuan had made up her mind, there was no turning back. This aspect of her personality was very much like her father's. The middle-aged man sighed deeply. He had worked together with Xuanhuan's father before and had the utmost admiration for him. The figure in the training hall drenched with sweat reminded him of the past, and his mind wandered back to 20 years ago. Currently, Xuanhuan had finished her training and was headed toward the middle-aged man. Uncle Yongzheng, you don't have to worry too much about me. I can practice on my own, she said while wiping her sweat. The way she spoke was ice-cold, yet not completely distant. Xuanhuan had only recently found out from her grandfather that the person in charge of the training hall was her father's colleague. Although his lack of talent limited his accomplishments, she still respectfully regarded him as an elder on account of his good relationship with her father in the past. I'm worried that it's too exhausting, Uncle Yongzheng replied. You don't have to be so hard on yourself. Sigh, your father used to be exactly the same. He couldn't even sleep a wink whenever he lost to someone. Like father like daughter indeed. Xuanhuan quietly listened. From a young age, she had rarely met her father. The impression she had of him was based on what others told her. This list contains the name of all the newly enrolled students in the Society of Excellence, Yongzheng said as he handed over the name list. I will continue to monitor any new members. Although repeating this so many times makes me sound really long-winded, I still want to remind you that you don't have to be so harsh on yourself since that was just a fluke. Xuanhuan took the list, calmly saying, Uncle Yongzheng, that was not an accident. A loss is simply a loss, and there are no excuses for it. Expecting such a reply, Yongzheng smiled wryly. Xuanhuan suddenly asked, Uncle Yongzheng, how do you feel about organizing another blind battle? Organize another blind battle. Yongzheng was momentarily shocked, but quickly responded, his young mistress thinking of luring him into a trap. Indeed, Xuanhuan said with a nod, I have concluded that there are only two possible reasons as to why that person would participate in the blind battle. The first is that he is interested in the battle itself. With his skill in fighting in the dark, it would not be surprising for him to be enticed by such a unique competition. The other possibility is that he is poor and simply joined for the prize money. Yongzheng muttered, the first reason seems more probable. Someone who is strong enough to defeat young mistress can't possibly be moved by a mere 50,000 yuan. Xuanhuan feels that way too. Can we spend some effort on another blind battle? A revamped blind battle should attract our target. Xuanhuan continued, even though the second possibility seems less likely, we cannot completely discount it. The prize money must be raised. Yong Zheng's eyes lit up as he said, "This is a great idea. Since he is so skilled in battling in the dark, a novel form of the blind battle is sure to entice him. As long as it is interesting enough, he will definitely be attracted. The prize money can easily be handled. We can raise it to 500,000 yuan. Make it 1,000,000, Xuanhuan stated resolutely. I'll be heading back shortly, so matters regarding the blind battle will need to be handled by you. I have a 3-day rest period in 2 weeks and will be back again to trouble Uncle Yongzheng then. Yongzheng sighed, leave it to me. As long as it was within his ability, he would carry out his mission thoroughly. To be honest, he was also very curious about this mysterious genius who could defeat Miss Xuanhuan. The suspending golden pagoda. Ai Hui viciously smashed his back against the wall like a large, ferocious fish. A barely perceptible jitter traveled across his back at the same instant when he contacted the wall. An abnormally resounding boom rang through the air. Ai Hui's eyes lit up. This time around, there was obvious improvement in the power of his arching fish back. It was now full of explosive power, far exceeding all his previous attempts. Before he had time to rejoice, a peerless force rebounded from the wall. His body was flung several meters away from the wall like a rag doll. Thump. He landed heavily in the mud. Luckily, he was experienced enough to make adjustments in mid-air. Even though his landing position seemed to cut a sorry figure, he was not even scratched. He casually plucked a blade of grass as he got up and started to chew on it. A pensive glint in his eyes hinted that he was deep in thought. The power of that last, arching fish back, had completely exceeded his expectations. If his, arching fish back, had been this powerful in the previous fight, his opponent's chest would probably have been shattered. The power of the, arching fish back, was much greater than he initially thought. More importantly, he still had the capacity to improve. Ai Hui spat out the grass chaff as his eyes flashed with excitement. Arching fish back wasn't some superior skill, nor was it part of any system of skills. Not being part of a system meant that it was possible to train this skill independently. Training the power of this skill up a notch would certainly make it a killing move. In his initial plan, arching fish back was only intended to be used as part of his training, but he was pleasantly surprised when he unexpectedly discovered its use as a potential killing move. He became even more engrossed in his training, repeating the same old routine every day. He would enter the pagoda to gather metal elemental energy, exit the pagoda, and practice the arching fish back on its walls. He would then proceed by sitting in a lotus pose, entering a meditative state, and absorbing the elemental energy. Repeating the process tirelessly, his elemental energy increased slowly but surely. Possibly as a result of his increased elemental energy, his body's compatibility with the metal elemental energy had risen. As his arching fish back became more refined, the efficacy of his trainings improved, but he soon discovered another issue. The metal elemental energy in his back was efficiently scattered with the arching fish back, but scattering the energy in other parts of his body with his palm was much less effective. However, the technique used to generate power in the arching fish back could not be employed in other parts of the body. The essence of the move lied in its use of one's spinal column and back muscles to mimic how a fish struggles to break free when caught. Realizing that his progress was hampered by this issue, Ai Hui knew that he needed to go back and make some additional preparations. He had previously returned one time for some dry rations and also asked Lu Lan for help with cleaning the training ground, to which Lu Lan happily agreed. Continuously training for 7 days had left him looking like a savage. His clothes were dilapidated but could not mask his impressive demeanor. Beneath his unkempt hair and dirt-crusted face were a pair of eyes as calm as water. Chapter 20. A sudden turnaround. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene Editor. Activities of the Society of Excellence were not compulsory, but few students would choose to miss them. No one wanted to miss the opportunity of receiving guidance from the seniors. Unlike teachers from the induction ground, the seniors from the society were all seasoned front-line soldiers. They might not be good at theory, but they had rich battle experience. Thus, the skills and techniques they imparted were of high practical value. To the front-line soldiers who were dispatched to be in charge of the society, it was a lucrative and easy job. Relaxing work, double the allowance, good food, and no requirement to guard against dire beast attacks during the cold, windy night. Instead, they were able to drink hot tea in a warm room. How enjoyable! Because the demand for this job was high, every city's resident staff members were rotated every year. Li Wei and Zhou Xiaoxi had just been transferred into Central Pine City and were newly in charge of the Society of Excellence. Li Wei was from the Army unit whereas Zhou Xiaoxi came from the Northern Navy unit. Both units had friendly relations and were without conflict, so the two of them quickly became friends. After all, they were going to be working together for a year. What a tranquil place. Zhou Xiaoxi examined the surroundings and sighed, how time flies. 15 years gone in the blink of an eye. I really want to go back in time. Being young is still the best. Upon hearing that, Li Wei laughed. And go after all the girls you failed to chase in the past. Zhou Xiaoxi rolled his eyes. Do I look superficial to you? Without waiting for a reply, Zhou Xiaoxi continued in a deadpan tone, yes. Li Wei burst into laughter. Zhou Xiaoxi asked suddenly, if you were to return to life in the induction ground, what is the first thing you would want to do? Sleep. Li Wei responded without the slightest hesitation. Sleep. Zhou Xiaoxi was quite surprised. That is right. Li Wei sounded certain. I would tell myself, Li Wei, you are going to be sleep-deprived for the next 15 years, so hurry and catch some sleep while you can or you will not get a chance again. Zhou Xiaoxi laughed out loud. He asked somewhat curiously, you had more activities during the night? Yes. Li Wei looked helpless. Come to think of it, I was unlucky. Upon graduating from the induction ground, I moved directly to the front line. Immediately after, the dire beasts became increasingly active every day. The first 2 years were not too bad, but they became rampant in recent years and harassed us almost every night. Zhou Xiaoxi's expression became grave. In recent years, the front lines of all regions had been in an increasingly tense state. The dire beasts had become abnormally restless, causing unease. As veterans who had been on the front lines for a long period of time, they understood this feeling. Civilians felt no pressure. Tension from the front line had no effect on the leisurely lifestyle of those at the back who were protected. Li Wei sensed the heavy atmosphere and smiled. What are we worrying about? We are working under so many big shots. Let us just enjoy and cherish this 1 year. We can create more happy memories to make up for the past. True, it is none of our business. Zhou Xiaoxi had an evil grin on his face. I am going to drill these rookies. When I was in the induction ground, the old men from the Society of Excellence tormented me like. Now I am motivated to do the same. Recalling the hard times he endured in the past, Li Wei nodded in agreement. In this area, we should not lose to our seniors. Look at this guy who just walked in, he looks sick. How can this be the case? The future of the Avalon of 5 Elements is in his hands. How can such weak shoulders carry that important responsibility? That is exactly what I was thinking. Zhou Xiaoxi agreed wholeheartedly. His smile became even more sinister. The way he gazed at the frail-looking student was the same way a big bad wolf looked at a fresh, tender, and snow-white rabbit. Xuanhuan looked pale. He was not feeling well, his vision was blurry, he felt dizzy, his limbs were going weak, and he was sweating all over. He would not have attended if not for the fact that this was the society's introductory gathering. Standing guard by the city gate continuously for 3 days and 3 nights, he had not paid attention to the cold weather and had caught a cold. That damned bastard. Just thinking about that damned fellow sent him into a rage. He coughed uncontrollably. Just you wait and see. One day you will fall into my hands and I, Xuanhuan, will not let you off. Student Xuanmu, are you ill? Is it serious? Xuanhuan snapped out of his anger and raised his pale face. He did not know who the man in front of him was, but he had a badge pinned on his chest pocket that revealed his identity. Xuanhuan hurriedly replied, "Thank you for your concern, senior. I caught a cold, and it's nothing serious." "I thought so." Zhou Xiaoxi grinned, revealing his canines. "You have been crowned the most gifted student of the year. How could you get knocked down by a mere cold? Come, come, come. Take a look at the training plan I have prepared for you. A genius needs a genius training plan. Since you are feeling all right, let us start now. If delayed, we would not be able to make it in time for night training." Xuanhuan looked at his senior in shock and thought he had misheard. Night training. Taking a student ill with a cold for night training. His pale, handsome, devilishly charming face was filled with bewilderment. Under his tall, handsome, and straight nose, mucus flowed down steadily from both nostrils. As Xuanhuan shivered in the cold with his mucus trickling down, Ai Hui was in the Vanguard training hall soaking in a piping hot bathtub. He was extremely content, and all of his fatigue disappeared. How comfortable. Training halls were prepared for practitioners. Most came with special bathing spots to help practitioners recharge. In the past, at the swordsman school, he had made a bathtub for himself using an iron-plated bucket. During his 3 years in the wilderness, taking a cold shower had been a luxury, let alone a warm bath. He would depart once again when day broke. Having a day of rest allowed his tensed muscles to loosen up. Lu Lan had advised him to consume a bowl of elemental soup as it would help to repair his muscle and bone injuries. The puppet also offered to brew it for him. Ai Hui asked about its cost. At least 40,000 yuan was the reply. Ai Hui, who was in great pain, decided to save this offer for when he returned next week. How expensive. Yesterday, he went to a blacksmith to custom order some things, and they had cost quite a bit. The iron chain he purchased previously was also quite expensive. If not for the 20,000 yuan that he took from the amateur, beaten-up man, Ai Hui would not even be able to pool together 40,000 yuan. The sky slowly brightened. As Ai Hui stepped out of his bath, he was energized and felt a boundless strength in his body. After cleaning the training hall, he packed some water and dried rations before shutting the door and setting off to the smithy to collect his custom-made items. Xuanhuan held onto his clothes tightly as he shivered. His body was shaking and his legs were weak as he shambled into the city. What a terrifying night. He did not know how he had managed to survive. His illness had worsened after a night of battling with the winds and he was freezing, starving, and exhausted. His eyes were vacant, he was breathing very weakly, and he resembled a zombie. His last rational thought was to seek a doctor immediately. His dull gaze fell upon a smithy, and he happened to see a certain someone lift up the bamboo blinds before entering the shop. Previously, he had scoured every corner for this person, but to no avail. Now, when he was not even searching, that guy suddenly appeared in a smithy. His gaze was fixed, and all the rage that had been building up burst into flames. Forget the cold and the doctor. These thoughts were thrown to the back of his mind. I have finally found you, you bastard. He did not know from where, but a wave of energy came over him, and he charged towards the shop with large strides. Upon reaching the entrance, he caught sight of Ai Hui's back from behind the blinds. Xuanhuan only had one thought in mind. Let us see if you can escape. With an indescribable rage, he reached his hand out abruptly and grabbed onto Ai Hui's shoulder.